first of all, thank you everyone for joining in. I know there are a few more people getting connected and facing a few connection issues expected with any webinar that we run. We're very excited to have everyone on board. This particular session is quite dear to us because we want to cover what I think everybody's going through today in the workforce, specifically, having to experience this through a pandemic. I believe we are all going through an element of fatigue in a very different sense, and it's quite important to address it. And something that's really near and dear to me, and we have the absolute experts on board kickstarting this with Sanja. Sanja is our President of Workforce at QuestionPro. She comes with a number of skill sets. She believes and promotes in ensuring employee happiness, and I can't wait to hear what she has in store for us. So let's get kick-started.
It is such an incredible pleasure to be here today, take a part of this event, and like Sanja was saying, talk about something that is so incredibly important in the world today. We're all going through so much, and really the essential way that we can get through it together is by learning from each other, helping each other, and supporting each other. And so today we'll spend a few minutes and I'll have an opportunity to share some of my knowledge on that, which again, I'm just incredibly grateful for the opportunity to kickstart this conversation. So to get us started, we're going to try to do a quick poll. Bear with me while I stop sharing my screen and run it on Zoom. Hopefully it will be relatively smooth. So let's give it a try. As a part of the discussion, what we wanted to do is we'll again talk a lot about burnout and what's happening in organizations and what's happening with different individuals. And what we wanted to get a sense of is, how are you all feeling? Because such an important part of us being to really able to mitigate this is to listen to each other, to understand each other. So I just launched a completely anonymous poll to the audience. Please feel free to put in your opinions, take a look. It's, again, we're not going to use it in the actual presentation, but just really want to get a sense of how everybody's feeling today. It's been over a year into the pandemic. We have all gone through a lot in many different ways. So this is just an opportunity for us to kickstart our day and say, how are you doing? Let us know. So we'll run it for a little bit longer. There are a few questions, so thank you all very much for participating. I will share the results in the end. I'm seeing them move around, so it's kind of fun to be able to see the behind the scenes of the answers coming in. I feel like I have a privilege of having a sneak peek into what everybody is saying. And it's moving. It's really fun to see it. I can't wait to share the results. I'll wait a little bit more because it's we're seeing more and more responses come in. So I'll give it at least a few more seconds to give everybody an opportunity to read through the questions, and then I'll share. And in the meantime, I'm going to see what the responses are. Oh, it's pretty good. Okay, we'll give you about 10 more seconds, and then we'll switch over to the results. All right, a few more answers coming in. I almost don't want to stop it because I want to give everybody an opportunity, but we have so much to talk about today, so I don't want to delay us too much. But oh, this is really great. Thank you so much for participating and for your transparency and really sharing how you're doing. Okay, and we'll do 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, last chance. I'm going to end the poll. Thank you so much, everybody that took part in it. And let me share the results. Here we are. Okay, so the first question is, how often do you feel exhausted or drained of energy? And look at this. Nobody said never. we're all feeling tired. With almost a quarter of people saying often and 63% saying sometimes. So part of the reason why we wanted to run this poll is to say, look, it's not just what the researchers saying, it's not just this phenomenon at large, but even when we have a group of individuals like this, we're still saying, oh, when will this be over? I'm exhausted. I want to, go back to a little bit more normal life and be able to get out and off my work. And And then even in particular, we ask, how often do you feel like your workload is difficult to manage? There is one person that said never. So I don't know. I know this is anonymous, but later, if you want to write to me and let me know your tips, that would be amazing. Because as you can tell, a lot of the rest of us on here find that at least sometimes. So 60% of us say that our workloads are difficult to manage at least sometimes. And that's quite a bit. And that's very much aligned with the statistics that we're going to share in the presentation. This one is always an interesting one. How often do you feel energized by your job? And we still have 70% of people saying they are. So that to me, I've seen these findings before because I've run this these questions. It's what's interesting is it doesn't mean that if we're exhausted, we also can't be energized. There is a space for both. The question now is how can we take those areas where we feel more overburdened and make more space to say, I love my job, I love what I do. But to me, this is really important to share with you because it doesn't mean that those days when you're feeling tired and when you just feel like, oh, I just wish I could have a break, that you don't necessarily love what you do. It's not an either or, it is very much an and. It's just about creating more of that space to feel even more energized. How often do you feel burnout from your job? Over half of us at least sometimes. So again, it's very much aligned with the findings and again shows really great importance to have this conversation because we'll talk a little bit more about burnout, but it's a serious cause. It's a chronic condition. So it's not just waking up one day and saying, oh, it's Monday, I'm tired from the weekend. But it's actually a larger impact on us and how tired do you feel? And how often do you feel like your job is really meaningful? This is beautiful that people often, almost half of the people, often feel like their job is meaningful. So, again, it doesn't mean that just because we're burned out at times, we don't feel this greater purpose. The great thing is that feeling a sense of connection to your job really helps settle burnout, really helps you get through it, and really helps you think about, I love what I do. So, how can I find ways to feel better more often than I do today? And I think that's really the big question that is on our minds. So, with that, thank you so incredibly much for participating in this poll. Thank you for being transparent, for sharing how you're feeling with us today. I'm going to take the poll off of my screen and we'll jump into the presentation. But thank you again very, very much for sharing these insights. And it's not a surprise for anyone that there is a huge global pandemic happening, but it is such an incredibly important reminder when we think about what are we going through, what are our colleagues going through. This huge crisis happened overnight. And it's not the first time that we were struck by crisis, but it's probably one of the first times in recent history that we were struck by a crisis in such a magnitude that impacted the whole world nearly equally. A lot of times we would think about, there would be a recession, but it would be geography specific or industry specific impact. But this just blindsided us overnight. And for most people, really, our world completely changed. But it's not just about the health, which is the number one most important thing. So imagine if it's not just about the health, how stressful this is. What happened is that this pandemic caused a global recession where majority of countries were impacted. So for many of you that are on this call, that are part of organizations, run divisions, work for multinational companies, have big responsibilities, you didn't have the opportunity to say, okay, now I'm going to focus on the MENA region because that's where we're struggling the most, or I'm going to focus on Europe because that's where the economic situation is tough. All of a sudden, we were uprooted everywhere. And it was also really difficult to ask people for help because everybody was going through the crisis. So whether it's our friends, whether it's our family and the personal, and whether it's our colleagues and the professional and our professional network, we looked for each other, but everybody was saying, I have such a mess that I have to deal with myself. I would love to help you as well, but please give me a moment to figure out what's going on internally. So again, our world was turned upside down so quickly that it was challenging to really find that footing. And when it comes to employment, because we talk about burnout specifically as it relates to organizations, employments in many places skyrocketed, not only in countries, but also across various industries. And that's what was so incredibly challenging, is that for a lot of us that work in technology, it's not that we weren't shaken up, but whenever I talk to my friends, I'm very transparent about the fact that I am working from home, and how lucky am I? Because a lot of people in different industries didn't have that opportunity. Many companies are just starting to fortunately bounce back now, but they had a very, very challenging year. But if you look at the numbers again, across the board, across different countries, unemployment increased. And in many places, it increased really significantly. So it changed the world around us. It not only had a personal impact on us, because for a lot of us, we thought about, how do I provide for myself? How do I provide for my family? What's my financial well being? That causes an incredible amount of stress. But what we'll see in the data is that it did have a ripple effect on burnout. And it did have this huge impact on our mindset around, well, I feel so incredibly lucky to have this job today. So, what are all the things that I need to make sure that I show the value and I don't lose it? And these are just some of the specific numbers to the MENA region. Again, the amount of research out there is just incredible. I'm citing all the sources, being true to my academic research herself, in case any of you want to go back and read any of these studies or look for any of these data sources as you follow the trends of how the world of work is changing. One of the things that I found very interesting in this particular study is it was published by PwC, and it was published in June of 2020, which when I was looking at the dates, I thought, wow, it's almost been a year. That it's just incredible. But this question really struck me because the way that it was asked, it said, if COVID were to end today, how long would you estimate it would take your company to get back to business as usual? And for these organizations, almost half of them in many cases said that it would take more than 6 months. And think about it, we're not done with COVID-19. So all of this timeline was moved out. This was asked in June with maybe some hope that it went soon, and it didn't. And so for a lot of organizations, we continue to face these challenges. And when we say when there's a reasonable end, we still have at least half a year and a year to really go back to business being as usual. And very few organizations had less than a month. So very few organizations are saying this almost didn't even impact me at all. And when we look at the revenue and the profits, organizations had tremendous impact as well. So that will be part of that, going back to business as usual, is saying, what were our numbers? What are our targets? And how do we go back to what our plans were previously? The reason why I'm sharing all of this with you is because a lot of times when we talk about burnout, depending on how much we know about it, and it's relatively new in the spotlight and media, a lot of times we tend to think that maybe it's, a person feeling tired, that it's an individual problem. I start with this just to show the tremendous impact that's going on economically, and how all of that is actually intertwined. How burnout is not something that's an individual, it's not something that, oh, it would feel nice to not be burned out. But the fact that the world went through such a difficult state, and we're going through such a difficult state, that we need all of us at our absolute best. Then when things settle down a little bit outside, then we can get up and say, okay, we've got this. Let's don't forget about going back to the way things used to be, or normal. We want to create a space that's much better than it was before. So what is burnout? To get on the same page around the concept, around the definition, because again, I think the word is a lot more popular today. And there might not be, just like with any new term, so much clarity around what does it actually mean. Is it just slight fatigue, or is it something more serious? So the concept originated in the 1970s. So even though we're hearing a lot more about it now, this preceded pandemic by decades. But it was only in 2019, still before the pandemic, that the World Health Organization actually included it in its international classification of diseases. So think about the magnitude of this challenge, that actually the WHO said, okay, we need to talk about this as a disease, because if we don't, we fear that globally as a community, we won't put enough effort, enough emphasis on actually making people better. So, what are some of the personal impacts? There is a plethora of data. There's so much data. There's so many findings. There's so many brilliant studies out there that it was impossible to choose, nearly impossible for this presentation. One that I found recently that I would really highly recommend is by Harvard Business Review called Beyond Burned Out. It's a really, really wonderful piece that provides a lot of different insights. And I pulled just a few of the statistics that really jumped out at me and spoke to me and I felt were the most relevant for our discussion. One is that 89% of people said their work life is getting worse. Take a step back and think about it. It's almost everybody. It's almost everybody that's saying that impact of what is happening around them is actually negative, which is interesting because if you look at some statistics, you can see that, wow, people actually were maybe even more productive during the pandemic. But why? It goes back to the point that we were talking about earlier around that potential fear that I will lose my job and how will I provide for my family. So we need to be smart when we look at the data and when we look at productivity numbers, which are very important, not to mistake that for people feeling okay and that it's coming easy to them. Because in research, people are telling us by and far that they're really having a challenge. And close to that, not even only looking at about work life, but well-being in general, 85% of people said that it has declined. And that is huge because if you think about it globally, I wouldn't say that in 2019 we were doing amazing and that everybody you would grab is saying, oh, I feel well rested and I feel very healthy and I feel like I have this balance. So we were in an incredible starting point generally. We were already working on getting better and then it just declined over time. 25% said that family connection is impossible to keep strong. This is something we'll talk about ongoing research in this presentation. This I thought was important because of the perceived notions around working from home and having more time with your family and what does that look like. Just to really truly understand and be able to connect with people, say, how are you doing? Just because your children are maybe at home with you, or do you actually have quality time with them? Not to assume that somebody is just working from home and it's solving all of these different challenges. And 56% of people said that job demand has increased. So this has been a common theme that I've been mentioning throughout for some of the key reasons for burnout. Now, what's the business impact? Right? Again, we want to make sure that we get out of the mindset of thinking about burnout as being just an individual challenge, but that it's actually much more bigger than that. There was a 1 trillion global loss in productivity in last year because of burnout. 1 trillion US dollars. That is an incredible amount of money attributed to people feeling overworked, people feeling stressed out, people feeling like they were over capacity. Along with that, 550 million work days were lost in the US alone because people felt like, I just need time off. I can't do this anymore. It wasn't about traveling to a beautiful new place or seeing family. It was just saying, I need to catch up on sleep. I need to plug. I can't go on with this pace. This statistic, I want you to take a close look at the job search one because we'll talk about it some more. And it goes back to our absolute best people. I'll say this a few times because I want everybody to hear me. Is that in this chaos that endured, in this pressure that people are feeling, your best people, and you're probably one of them. So I hope that when I'm saying this, you can relate to it, were some of the people that were impacted the most. Why? Because they were the most conscientious, they were oftentimes the most capable, they were the ones that were relied on to pull us through whatever mess we were experiencing. Those who are burnt out, those who had that extra pressure, are more than 2.5 times as likely to look for a job. So, when you're thinking about your employee experience, when you're thinking about connecting with your employees, just keep in the back of your mind that the scientists, the researchers are saying the situation is improving. The job market is starting to strengthen. If you didn't have a chance to do it before, today you have to connect with your workforce. You have to understand how they're feeling because you have a very high risk of your top performers starting to look outside if they're not already. So, not a scare tactic. I don't want to scare everyone. It's just real data. And I think sometimes we forget because some of our best people will show up, they will smile at you at Zoom, they will work the late nights, and they might not share just everything else that's going on. So, It's to make sure that you really relate to those individuals and give them the space they need to continue to thrive, and flourish inside your organization, not somewhere else. So I think you're getting the theme of the conversation. The burnout is more than an employee problem. It is an organizational problem that requires an organizational solution. So what do we do about it? What are some key causes and what are some key remedies? So some of the key causes around burnout, the first and largest one is unsustainable workload. It's the idea that most companies during the chaos of COVID-19 needed to continue with the same amount of work or more. In Out of the best intentions, a lot of us stopped hiring because we wanted to keep the best people. We wanted to be able to make sure to pay them, which has absolute best intentions and is not necessarily the wrong solution. But I think one of the forgotten things is that as we stopped adding headcount, the people that we had, their workload grew, but we all only have 24 hours in the day. And during those hours, maybe we'd like to sleep and shower and have a couple of meals and spend some time with our family. So again, it's thinking about that capacity and understanding how much are we asking people to do, and that oftentimes maybe it comes in increments, so we don't even realize actually how much we're burdening people, and they might not speak up out of fear unless we give them a platform or space to speak up. Some other causes were insufficient recognition for effort. So, not feeling appreciated for the work that you do, not feeling visible for the work that you do, perceived lack of control. And we'll talk about that some more too around where do I work? When do I work? How do I work? If I'm going to be managing this big workload, what can you give me as a potential trade off for me to be effective and experience less burnout? Another one is lack of supportive community. So that is something that is really critical, for us to know who can we turn to, who can help us. And a lot of times that's really when managers can significantly step in and make sure that they are supporting their teams. We should all be supporting each other. I think that's incredibly important, but it's particularly where leaders can be more empathetic and show their support. And then, of course, perceived lack of fairness. And for me, being an organizational psychologist, out of all the theories that I learned in graduate school, this one, for some reason, really, I think, stuck with me the most. And what it means is that there's a certain outcome, and the outcome is exactly the same. When a person understands the reason for the outcome, they are much more likely to be okay with it than if they're just told what the outcome is. So whether it's, hey, Sanja, we have this huge project. We know that you are just, completely, you have a lot going on, but we need your help. It's going to end on this date. We're going to, we really need your assistance there, and we're choosing you for this reason versus, Sanja, here's another project. Thank you for your help, or go ahead and work on it. So the idea of whether it's a good outcome, bad outcome for somebody, for us to know why we were selected or why we were not selected, it's something actually has a completely different psychological impact. So that's something that, as we think about communication, as we think about whether we're going back to hybrid workplaces, different kinds of working situations, as much as possible to be transparent with our people around why we're making certain decisions will be tremendously important. So, what are some tips to prevent burnout, right? I'm sure there are many of books out there. I'm hopeful that many individuals are writing books about this now, which means that there's so much information. For the sake of time, because I know I don't have you for weeks on end, just about 15 or so more minutes, I just wanted to share some of the key tips that really jumped out at me again for what leaders and organizations can do. So going back to the manageable workloads, which again, you'll keep hearing me talk about time and time again, just to make sure it sinks in, is this is another Harvard Business Review study. And here it shows again how huge of an impact manageable workloads have on burnout. And why do I keep bringing that up? Because it's been shown to be, as you can see in this data, for example, if we look at the right-hand side, thinking back to the start of COVID-19, how has your workplace well-being changed, and what was the biggest contributor? 56%, by and far the largest, I mean, more than twice as much as the next cause, was increased job demands. So we're seeing that on the personal end and we're seeing that on the professional end. And the reason why I keep talking about this is because I believe it's manageable. I believe we need to be aware of how much we're asking people to do. We need to be aware of the kind of impact that it's having on them. And then also, how do we control that? Because in some ways, we're fortunate that it's something that's probably more easily controllable than certain other factors. So, overwork was cited as the key reason for burnout and decreased well being. When? How many hours? You might be asking yourself, well, what does overwork mean? We know people in different industries that work 80 hours a week. Is that when it happens? And it's not. Actually, in a Gallup study, they found that it's at 50 hours that is pretty much the breaking point where you start to increase work significantly or burn out significantly. So when you think about that, it's just a couple of extra hours a day, which is scary enough. If you read the news and different studies, most people are working a couple of extra hours because we're grabbing that time from the commute and we're on in the evenings because the times sometimes got funky for our work hours. And so it doesn't take that much. It's just that 50 hours is when that breaking point is. And you see this again, the thread that the highest performers have been overloaded the most. There's actually studies and research that show that. So how do we manage workloads? What do we do? I said it could be relatively simple. How? The first strategy is to communicate more often and more effectively about goals and priorities. So one thing that I've learned personally in my career, and again, as an organizational psychologist, is the importance of goals. So when I was even just in the process of getting my PhD, it was one of our core classes. And I remember the professor saying, goals should be challenging but manageable and attainable and timely, and everybody should have a goal and be clear on what they are. And I thought, of course, that it just makes so much sense. And then I went into the real world or the working world and realized that even though it makes a lot of sense, it's not always the case. People don't always talk about goals, and it's actually a lot of times more often that they don't than they do. And so having those clearly defined goals, in my personal experience, I found that quarterly is a really great time to set them. So many of us, if you have revenue targets or if you have different kind of quantifiable targets, they generally get set annually. For your product development, it gets set annually. Marketing plans, we usually think about it in terms of a year, but here's a really long time. A lot can happen in a year. More than even we just saw last year. We know that's generally the case. And so I found that thinking about what we want to accomplish in a year is great, but really setting specific quarterly goals makes it more timely because you feel like, okay, I have this specific amount of time. It's not monthly, it's a little bit more. So I have enough time to actually accomplish something larger. But it also prompts these timed adjustments and conversations. Now, leaders should not be meeting with their teams once a quarter to review goals. It should be happening once a week or once every 2 weeks to readjust. But if it doesn't, if it's something that's not innately in their DNA yet, at least it gives you this quarterly check in to be able to sit down, look at the progress, and look at the priorities. I would advocate for it to happen much more frequently than that. And something else that I think as leaders we sometimes forget is when we ask teams to do work on an additional project or add something to their plate, a lot of times it's something new, maybe it's something we haven't done ourselves, and we don't know how much effort it's going to require. We don't know how much time it's going to require. And I remember way back at the beginning of my career talking to my leader at the time and her saying she'd asked somebody to do some reports, and it was taking this woman like I think 15, 20 hours a week. And that was not even a fraction of her job. But my leader had no idea. When they finally had that conversation, she said, oh, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. No, they're not nearly important enough for it to take it that much time. Please, no, let's just do this one instead of all of them. And, let's move on. So it is really important to communicate about goals, communicate about priorities, and be able to do it on an ongoing basis. So that way you can really understand how your teams are feeling and have an opportunity to raise your hand yourself and say, listen, is this one of the key things that I need to do because it looks important to you? And I actually just a few weeks ago had that conversation with my leader where he had asked me to do something. And I thought, oh, I have so many other things to do. And I know this is really important to him, but is it the most important? I don't know. But I just recently started a question pro. I don't want to disappoint him. And you know what? I sent him a note. We had a quick conversation, and he said, Sanja, no, no, don't worry. You can do it later. You're focusing on the right things. And that alleviated so much stress. And so having that dialogue is so, so incredibly important. It seems really simple and it's not rocket science, but I will tell you it doesn't happen often enough. So just reflect back on how you're communicating with your leaders, how you're communicating with your teams, and make sure that it's happening with the right frequency to understand the workload to be able to share that. Now, there's a lot of talk around agile approaches. And I remember it was at a conference a few years ago, and one of the keynote speakers said that it's probably one of the most overused words in HR. We're talking about agile all the time. And I kind of laughed, and as I was putting it in this presentation, I thought, oh my. But I thought there were some interesting tips. So it's not just a buzzword, there are actually bullet points around it for how to implement agile in this kind of sense. So then one is to have teams focus on fewer and more critical activities. So again, going along the lines of capacity and goal setting to say, maybe we don't do everything. We choose what we do that has the most impact, and then we do it really well. There are also these backlogs that are used to set and reset priorities. And all that means is just documenting. And documenting things and putting them in writing is, again, seems very simple, but it's really powerful because sometimes we can have a conversation and walk away with a different interpretation of what needs to be accomplished. So putting it in writing puts another checkpoint to make sure we're on the same page. And it also allows us to say how many things are we looking to accomplish? What is the time frame that we have? Oof, no, okay, it's not going to fit. We need to cut something out. And it's also another way to keep focus on the most important activities. So, one of the things that I used to do with my leaders too, and still do, I just gave that example actually, is what's the most important. So, we have these plates, and all of a sudden, things always get thrown on. It's life. And they're overflowing, and you're thinking, what do I do? What's most critical? And so, this actually also gives us an opportunity to continue to have that conversation and say, I'm working on these things and prioritizing these things. Are they the most important? And then, as we mentioned, projects are time boxed. So we know what we're focusing on to be able to really put our energy towards that. Now, creating a culture where employees are really comfortable speaking up, I think is the ultimate goal. Now, in the meantime, because I think that in the vast majority of organizations, it's probably aspirational, not for every manager, but for a lot of them, is to proactively ask your people until you're really confident. And I would say maybe even then, that somebody will raise their hand and say, listen, I feel like I have a lot. For those of you that have teams and who are leaders, I would highly encourage you to initiate a conversation. Don't wait for somebody to raise their hand because, again, especially in the circumstances where we are today, a lot of times people might feel a little fearful to expose and say, but what if, like, is that going to be a negative perception of me? We see that most of us are overloaded, right? And so, as leaders, having that and asking that proactively is really critical. Another component is communicating with empathy. And oof, what a powerful and what a sometimes difficult thing to learn. I have gone through life thinking I'm a pretty open minded person. And I have judged people but in situations that I couldn't imagine myself being. I would say, how could I can't believe that person's doing this, or I can't believe they're not treating the situation differently. Or if they just did this, they would be better. I think all of us have done that. And then you go through a situation and you say, wow, now I'm in a situation and I actually did the exact same thing they did. And I never thought I would, but now I understand. The thing is, we're never going to experience firsthand every situation that people around us are in, whether they're our colleagues, whether they're our leaders, whether they're our team members. So we need to work really, really hard to understand how somebody else is feeling, never having been in their shoes, to know what's the best way to support them and to create a space where they feel comfortable opening up. So, how do we communicate effectively and empathetically? What does that mean? One is engaging in deep conversation. So, a lot of us have, our one-on-ones, and there's best practices that say, open up, ask them how somebody's feeling. A lot of times, if you just ask someone, hey, how was your weekend or how's your day? They'll say, okay, it's good. Um, Maybe it varies a little bit culturally, but not much. You really need to create the space for the person to feel like they really can open up and share how they're feeling. So engaging in deeper conversations actually allows to create that space a lot more effectively. Identifying your own personal biases. So I mentioned that in my own personal story is understanding that each one of us come with a specific experience, with a specific mindset, and every person we encounter will be different. And so to understand that we view the world through what we experienced in the past, and that's okay. But we need to challenge ourselves to be more open minded and understand what other people are experiencing. Asking more questions is another really powerful way to connect and listening. Oftentimes, and I've had this conversation frequently lately with different people, is that we try to fix. We try when somebody is talking to us, oh, but have you tried this? Oh, but what about this? Listen, really listen and take in what somebody is saying because, again, it creates a space for them to feel more open to share their situation. Because if we jump into fix mode right away, they might back up and say, okay, no, thank you. That's really great advice, but never really get into what they're experiencing or how they're feeling. So those are just a few high level, empathy has been another really big word over the last year. And so it's not always necessarily clear, even though we know it's so important to be empathetic, it's maybe not always so clear how. One of the people that I absolutely love and have tremendous respect for in this field is Brene Brown. She has done a really, really beautiful job of educating the community on empathy and how to do it. I have a video of hers here. I'm not going to show it, but if you put in Brene Brown on Google or on YouTube, you'll find this video. It's very short and very, very powerful. So if you have just a couple minutes, I would really recommend that if you're continuing to think about and involve in how you're empathetically connecting with others, it's a really good one to watch. And so finally, we talked about people feeling like they have control. These statistics are all over the place. It's all over the news. Each one of the organizations announcing what are they doing? Are they going back hybrid? Are people working remotely? Are people being paid the same amount no matter where they are? Are people being paid different? Are they go? There are many, many things that are happening across the world, across organizations. People are saying they want more flexibility in general. They're saying, I'd like to be able to decide. I'd like to have some more control over my hours. I would like to have some control over where I work. The interesting thing is this will have to be an iterative process because we are in a different situation today, again, that shook our minds and shook us to a core much faster and much differently than probably many things in our lives have. We're getting to know ourselves. When the situation and the circumstances around us change, workers should have the right to also change their mind around how, where, when they want to work. So this, I think, if you are somebody in the organization that has the ability to impact this, measure it over time, ask people over time. I know a lot of studies are being done now. I will tell you, there is absolutely no way any survey results, any opinions will be the same a year from now as they are today. So, this is a conversation that we need to continue to have with people, again, as circumstances and the world around us changes. So, with a few minutes that we have left, how does QuestionPro help mitigate burnout, right? So, I'm passionate about this topic. Our team's passionate. As an organization, we are. But what are we doing about it? What is really our claim, our way to impact a community around us? Well, we are a survey organization. We are, as one of our pillars, we focus on the workforce. We focus on the employee experience. We focus on the employee life cycle. And with that, we've spent some time thinking about what are some powerful questions to ask people to measure all of these different things, right? So I gave you some recommendations for changes to make in your organization, both from the organizational level to the personal leader level to the individual level. How are we doing, right? So when we put so much effort into something, it is really, really important to know what's the outcome. So these are actually just specific survey questions. Most of these we've measured with our clients. We actually jump started the year Question Pro. And if any of you are interested, we have a blog post and some of our findings internally, a couple of conference presentations where I've shared these insights for us to understand. We care about our people. How are you feeling? What is the organization What is the perception, how we're supporting you? Do you feel like we're genuinely interested in your health and well-being? Do you feel like that the culture encourages the balance? So in the message of from us as leaders, as the creators of culture, is there a perception that we care? And on top of that perception that we care, what is the impact? So, one of the interesting things that we found, even in our study, is we scored incredibly high and we have a supportive culture, work life balance. Our leaders care, our organization cares. We thought, yes, we're so glad because that's the perception we want to give. And we're so glad that it's resonating with our employees. But let me tell you, that alone didn't completely stop burnout. We still had people saying, I feel stressed out. We had people saying, I don't feel like I can take time off. So, even with our best intentions to create a supportive environment, we need to continue to iterate, just like nearly every other organization. So, this data was very eye opening in the sense for us to know that as an organization, we're supportive, but we still need to do additional things to help prevent burnout, to make sure that people feel like they can really take a day off. And so, even as a result of that, if you saw in any of our social media, we had a surprise day off. So, our CEO came in a town hall that we have every Thursday and said, you know what, Monday, take off. Have a long weekend, enjoy with your families, enjoy with your friends, enjoy by yourself. Do whatever you want, but just take the day off and take it for yourself. And that it was really nice because it was unexpected. LinkedIn is doing something similar this week. So we're seeing these directions from the organizations for a specific time to take off. Why is that valuable? Because you're not going to have hundreds of thousands of your colleagues messaging you saying, oh, I know you're off, but if you have the second, or oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know you're off. So it helps with a different mindset. And we're also regionally, we're a global organization, we're in nearly every continent. And so we're regionally rolling out additional strategies for people to be able to unplug and take time off that are the most impactful for each specific region. So one of the fears or one of the roadblocks in mitigating workout a lot of times, especially for larger companies, but I would say companies of any size, is saying, well, how do we roll out something globally? How do we do something that works for everyone? And you take the time and you think, and some months pass, and we don't have that luxury at this point. People are saying they're burned out, they're stressed. And so for us at QuestionPro, one of the ways that we treated it, we said, perfect. Every regional head has the ability to decide what's most powerful for their team. The only thing you have to do is announce it before the end of March. But whatever you think will help your people the most, let's go ahead with that. So, those are just some of the things, again, understanding, having that conversation. We're calling it empathy at scale when it comes to surveys because it's different than just a regular check-in with somebody. It's really having this conversation to say, how are we doing? How are we supporting you? How are we feeling? What else can we be doing to help you? And doing that on an ongoing basis is really critical. So that's where Question Pro plays, and in the community where we want to make a difference is to really help organizations have that really effective conversation, have the data, have the insights to be able to say, now I know exactly what the challenges are and I know exactly what I need to do to have a greater impact. So it's data driven, it's actionable, and it's going to, as we shift the world, really continue to put people in a much better place when it comes to their well-being, when it comes to a sense of burnout, connection with family, etc. So to wrap up, and we'll take a couple of, oh no, maybe well, I'll see if I have some questions. We can address them later because of time. But I wanted to announce a giveaway. So in addition for us really caring about the space and being in the business where we provide survey software for organizations to be able to connect with their people much more effectively, we do want to give away 5 free culture assessments. We're going to do a raffle. So please, if you're interested, send a note to the email address sales-mena@questionpro.com. Give us your name, your company name, employee size. If you want to send us a note for why you're interested, that's great. And over the week, after we get all the inquiries in, we're going to select the winners and then we'll contact you directly to kick off, tell you exactly how it's going to work. But again, we're so passionate about making a difference in this space that for any of you that joined us today that would really like to take this to the next level with your organization, we wanted to be able to give you a platform to do that. Thank you so incredibly much for your time today, for listening, for participating. Again, I'm a huge believer that as a community is the only way that will really change the world of work for better. So this is my contact information, my personal email. If you ever want to drop me a note, if you have a question about something we discussed, if you have an idea, if you want to stay connected on LinkedIn, I would love that as well. But I'm just incredibly grateful for your time today and for joining us.